As soon as we are chronically sleep deprived or even acutely sleep deprived, we will struggle very much from a cognitive perspective. If you're skating along on 6 hours, for example, you would just be sleep restricted. It's much more insidious. You're fine, I'm handling this, but it'll eventually start to catch up. Over time, if we don't get sufficient sleep, we're much more likely to develop cardiovascular disease, diabetes, symptoms of or neurodegeneration earlier than what might be considered normal. I think that long term, it's going to help protect my physical health, my mental health, and my brain health. I'm all in.
Welcome to smulcast, where we help you live a healthier, fuller life. Today we're uncovering another fascinating aspect of our sleep in our multi-part sleep series. We'll be exploring a topic that affects all of us, how our circadian rhythm and sleep relate to our cognitive performance and overall well-being. To help us navigate this complex topic, we're joined by Prof.Dale Rae, Director of Sleep Science and Professor at the University of Cape Town, specializing in the field of sleep. Dale, it's so great to have you here again.
Thanks, Tracy. Excited to be here.
Dale, can you just start by telling us why you do what you do?
I guess I'm really lucky. I get to study a topic that is super interesting to me. I really found it by accident. I'm trained as an exercise physiologist, but I've been in the sleep field for sort of in excess of 12 years now. I'm specifically interested in human sleep and how it's related to our physical health, especially around obesity and non-communicable diseases, and also sports performance. But I'm really fortunate that it's something that I'm super passionate about. I could speak about sleep till the cows come home. Love studying it. I learn so much from the people that I work with. And then was fortunate enough to be able to use that information and that inquisitivity, I guess, to start a company which helps people with their sleep problems called Sleep Science.
Well, I'm really excited to pick your brain on something that I think is relevant to all of us. We're going to be chatting about cognitive function. Could you maybe just start by defining for us what cognitive function involves?
Quick disclaimer here, I am definitely a physiologist and I'm by no stretch an expert in neuropsychology or anything that is massively cognitive, but yeah, I can share a little bit about what I do know. So when we think about cognitive function, it's really about our thought processes, so everything that requires you to think. It might be things like your working memory, for example. So that's something that we're pretty interested in. It might be your ability to process, to task switch, to filter out information and keep focused on one thing while there are many distractors being thrown at you. So I guess for most of us, we think about our cognitive processing in terms of what we need to do at work, being able to sort of think clearly, for example, make decisions, that kind of thing. It's important for learning, of course, laying down memory, which is key. So those are really the most important parts, I guess.
So in light of that, does our cognitive function fluctuate throughout the day, and how does that relate potentially to our body clock?
So at the risk of really stating the obvious here, your cognitive function is going to be best when you're alert. And so how do we think about when we're alert? Well, each of us will know that there's times of day when we feel that our alertness levels are super high and other times where we feel sluggish and pretty lethargic, in fact. The most obvious distinction is when we are asleep. If someone were to wake you up in the middle of a deep sleep, do not ask me to do any processing, any thinking. Absolutely not. It's a bad time of the day. So obviously we're designed to be more cognitively active during waking hours. But there's a subtle difference as to which time of the day is best suited for different chronotypes. And we've touched on chronotypes before. I won't go into the details of it, but broadly speaking, think about, am I a morning type? Do I bounce out of bed really early in the mornings? Or am I an evening type? Do I have a late bedtime and prefer to sleep in the morning? Or am I somewhere in the middle, the good old neither type? So typically, from a cognitive perspective, we find that the morning types are on their A game in the morning. Very often within 30 to 60 minutes of waking up, they are good to go. They love to study, they love to read, they love to think. They're often at their most creative, for example. Their brains are literally on fire. So that's the time of day that they would be best suited to doing the thinking tasks. They're typically pretty useless by the end of the day. So once we sort of get to 5, 6, 7 o'clock, don't ask us to do any hard work. They'll choose more menial tasks for sure. Whereas the night owl is the other way around. Do not ask them to do any deep thinking in the morning. It's the late hours of the evening, in fact, even early hours of the morning, sort of often 1, 2 a.m., where they are just on fire. So that's definitely their cognitive sweet spot. And then on average, we typically find that there's a bit of a dip after lunchtime. So most of us don't do particularly well at sort of somewhere around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. It can shift a little bit for each of us. That's that sort of post-lunchtime dip. I think some societies make use of that as siesta time to relax and not to do any thinking. And so there are a couple of reasons for that, but basically what's happened is we've got quite a few hours between when we woke up, so the end of sleep, and sort of as the day progresses, we're accumulating a little bit of fatigue, and yet our circadian alerting system, this is the part of your circadian rhythms that is driving to keep you awake, hasn't quite kicked in as it should do yet, and we're just waiting for that to kick in. Generally, as soon as that does, you get that second wind feeling where you feel like, right, I'm good to go now. And then cognitively, you're on fire again. It can be maybe 4 o'clock or so.
That's helpful. So the afternoon slump is quite a universal phenomenon then.
Definitely.
Can we chat to some of the biological mechanisms, particularly around melatonin and cortisol, and how those then filter into our cognitive performance?
Sure. So they really relate to sort of the making sure you're in very discrete states of either being super awake and alert, or you are sort of nice and dulled and able to sleep. And at the end of the day, if we think about the roles of these two hormones, well, they have multiple roles, but let's simplify melatonin, for example. Melatonin is a sleep signaling molecule. So essentially, it's a hormone that your body secretes once the sun goes down, and it then signals to all the cells in your body that it's time to sort of pack it in and start to slow down as you switch to sleep phase. So for obvious reasons, once melatonin starts to be secreted, it can be as early as maybe 7 p.m. for sort of early oriented people, and as late as midnight. We'll find that we won't be well primed to do good cognitive work, good thinking work. No, your body's got the message that it's time to sort of shut down. Cortisol, on the other hand, is a wake-promoting hormone. And so we often think about the cortisol awakening response. So in the morning, we get this big surge of cortisol, up goes our blood pressure, up goes our heart rate. And that's really to kick us from being in this sleep and restful state into sort of moving and being awake and alert. And so when that happens, then we're sort of starting to prime ourselves to be able to do more cognitive work.
I think that cortisol often gets a bad rap, but I think it's about the appropriate levels, right? And the appropriate time of those levels that is important. If we relate this now to sleep, so sleep quality and quantity, how does that start to impact our cognitive performance?
So this is a really interesting area, and it's probably been studied like more than anything else when it relates to sleep. If I think about what a lot of the psychologists and the sort of neuroscientists have looked at in the past couple of decades, they've done a heap of work which looks at the effects of good sleep quality and then sleep deprivation or sleep restriction protocols on impacting our cognitive performance. And we know very, very clearly that when it comes to memory, for example, we need to have good sleep to be able to have good memory. So part of the reason for that is that when we sleep, for example, our brain is busy reinforcing neural networks or pathways that we made use of in the daytime, which is a really important component of embedding memory. And of course, then being able to access it, those thoughts and information when we need them at a later date. And so if we are sleep deprived, we are interfering with our ability to store memory, and then obviously we're less likely to be able to access it the next day. In terms of other aspects of our cognition, I think about like task switching, for example, and being able to filter out stimuli and sort of do higher order thinking. None of that comes easily when we're in a sleep deprived state. It's almost as if the body is hunkering down and saying, listen, I'm running on red here. You may not ask me to do any higher order functioning because I just don't have the bandwidth right now. To put it really mildly. And so we know very, very well that as soon as we are chronically sleep deprived or even acutely completely sleep deprived, we will struggle very much from a cognitive perspective.
I think for our audience and for myself, actually, it would be really helpful to just define what sleep deprivation actually is, because I think the term gets thrown around. I'm so sleep deprived, but what actually qualifies as being sleep deprived?
Yeah, that's a good point. So from a scientist perspective, we define complete or total sleep deprivation. So that is when you've done an all-nighter. So you haven't had any sleep in any given 24-hour period, and that often then goes on to sort of a bit longer, 36 or 48 or 36 hours. My maths is shocking. You can see I'm definitely not definitely not an evening type. And then there is partial sleep deprivation. So that's when we maybe have half of our normal sleep opportunity. And then there's sleep restriction. And that's when we eat away at the edges of our sleep. So we either go to bed a little bit later than we should or wake up a little bit earlier than we're ready to. And that just more slightly reduces your sleep opportunity. So what we're really looking at is for the differential between what your body needs. So what is your actual personal sleep need? So let's say your sleep need, your sweet spot is 7.5 hours. So obviously 0 hours, you'd be completely sleep deprived. If you had just over sort of 3 hours, 3 hours 15 or so, then you would be partially sleep deprived. But if you're skating along on 6 hours, for example, you would just be sleep restricted. And so it doesn't look like a train smash on the surface, but you're accumulating the sleep debt, which is the difference between your sleep need and then actually what you're getting. And it's that accumulated sleep debt which starts to interfere with our ability to multitask, to do higher order thinking, to be able to handle numbers, for example, to be able to lay down memory. And it's a very, I think because most of us are probably just chronically sleep restricted, if we think about it really. Not too many people go around pulling all-nighters all the time. It's it's a random thing. It happens not very often, and we generally don't have too many ill effects. But actually, I think never underestimate the consequences of this sort of partial or sleep restriction, because it's much more insidious. You're fine. I'm handling this. I still seem to be able to function. Nobody can work out that I'm thinking a bit more slowly than usual, and I'm still handling all that I need to do at work, for example, but it'll eventually start to catch up. And then essentially you're at that feeling where you just can't focus for the life of you. You know you need to be doing this, and you find yourself looking at other tasks, getting distracted, avoiding the really hard work. So that's some of the sort of first signs, perhaps, that your lack of sleep is now starting to interfere with your ability to think at the end of the day. And then, of course, when you sort of start to go, oh, what's that word I'm looking for? I know what this word is, and I can't remember how, a basic piece of information, probably other little signs that your cognitive processing is about to sort of, or it is slowing down, and it's probably linked to this sleep deprivation.
Is the tolerance for that sleep debt quite individual? And is there anything that determines that? Because I think, I know some individuals that will tolerate a few nights and maybe even long-term, a few nights of poor sleep or less sleep than they should be getting, and they seem to handle it all right. So what is the difference there between someone that maybe handles it better than another?
Yeah, absolutely. It's inter-individual, without a doubt. So there's some people that can have heaps of sleep restriction. I literally say that they're abusing their sleep, and it's so frustrating because they don't seem to have any ill effect, and sort of they can't imagine why everybody else who's complaining about being a little bit sleep deprived is all sort of antsy and feeling that they can't do what they normally do. So there's definitely inter-individual variation. I think that in the short term, what happens is when we have had a bit of sleep restriction and we've got a little bit of sleep debt, our body decides, well, if you keep doing this, all right, so this is the new normal, and I'm now going to need to do something so that we can keep going, because she's clearly not going to give in and give me the sleep that I need. And so this is where your central nervous system sort of kicks in, and we go into sort of sympathetic nervous system overdrive. And so we have a lot of stimulation of our sympathetic nervous system, which is literally masking the effects of this chronic sleep deprivation, so that we don't feel so sluggish, so that we can still keep thinking in the way that we're accustomed to. And so on one hand, that's quite useful, because now I don't necessarily need to rely on caffeine or other stimulants or other tricks to try and keep myself alert in the daytime. but it's just putting a bit of a bandage on the underlying problem. And the thing is that over time, we spoke about cortisol earlier, and you mentioned it's bad rap. So that's exactly right, because now we have too much cortisol, and so we have these chronically elevated, but not to disease levels, but we just like almost insidiously high levels of cortisol, for example, maybe a little bit too much adrenaline. And that is trying to keep us alert and active, but that can actually be doing quite a lot of damage long-term to us. And then, of course, when the body just goes, yeah, that's enough, then you'll pretty much crash.
So it's basically a compensatory mechanism gone wrong, right?
Yeah.
Can you touch on some of the long-term consequences of sleep deprivation or sleep restriction?
Yeah. So we think mostly about this in terms of the long-term consequences, what happens to our physical health. So we've that's a little bit off-piste for now, probably, if we want to stay focused on cognition. But we know that over time, if we don't get sufficient sleep, we're much more likely to develop conditions like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, sort of weight gain in the middle, but ultimately all of that probably through chronic levels of high inflammation. And that really seems to be the driving force behind much of that. There are obviously short-term mood effects, but the long-term effects might be that we exacerbate an underlying mental health condition, for example. Then suddenly it sort of gets to the point where we now start to get symptoms, and then we are sort of in a state of having depression or perhaps anxiety or something like that. One of the critical functions of sleep is to allow our body the chance to do this fundamental housework. So our lymphatic system is very, very busy removing toxins that have built up during the day. And there's now some good evidence to show that over time, although it's natural for something like beta amyloid, for example, to accumulate in the brain as we age, and by the way, that's one of the molecules which is associated with neurodegenerative diseases, so I'm thinking like Alzheimer's. There's now good evidence to suggest that over time, if you're chronically sleep restricted, you have higher levels of beta amyloid in your brain than a person who has had sufficient sleep. So this kind of suggests to us that you are shortchanging your body on the time that it needs to do this very, very important housework function. The result being that you might end up with at least symptoms of or neurodegeneration earlier than what might be considered normal. So from my perspective, if I'm looking at sleep, it's a long-term insurance policy. It's difficult to say to people, listen, you should take your sleep seriously today because, it's very important for all of these sort of things. But if I think that long-term, it's going to help protect my physical health, my mental health, and my brain health, yes, I'm all in. Tell me what I need to do, because I don't want to end up having any kind of dementia or Alzheimer's a day before it is necessary.
Absolutely. I'm going to run with your analogy of the policy, the insurance policy that you've mentioned in terms of making investments in your sleep. Am I right in saying that you want to be making consistent investments in your sleep rather than having small little deprived, restricted investments and then trying to catch up? I'm assuming we can't catch up on our sleep, right?
Yeah, this is a really hotly debated topic at the moment. In fact, there's some beautiful evidence which shows that when people have irregular sleep patterns, so maybe shorter sleep during the week, longer sleep on the weekend, that refers to the catch-up sleep that you spoke about, or there's a big shift in their timing. So in the week, they've got this earlier timing, and then on weekends, they relax into their natural timing and it becomes much later. That kind of irregularity is actually far worse for us from a physical health perspective than we previously thought. So it actually does more damage to our sort of cardiovascular and metabolic health than having short sleep. And so people think about, well, can I catch up sleep? Of course you can pay back some sleep debt. I mean, we pay back sleep debt every day, don't we? Because we hop into bed at the end of the day and we're paying back a little bit of debt, but we don't sort of fully catch up. And so then the other thinking is, well, if I'm really busy during the week and I'm skating by on, say, 5 hours of sleep, does it really matter if I can then do 8 hours on the weekend and pay things back? And that actually is problematic, not only for the cardiovascular and sort of metabolic issues that I've spoken about, but it actually creates a lot of circadian desynchronization as well within your body. And we know that that is also really important for your physical health. So from that perspective, we prefer people to be consistent as far as possible.
And you mentioned that back in our previous episode on the basics of sleep, about our bodies really liking that consistency. And I think we all are, to a degree, creatures of habit, right?
Absolutely.
I'm going to change tack a little bit and switch things to light, because I think this is something that people are really interested in. We've all got a phone, we've all got a computer, we're around a lot of artificial light, we're surrounded by artificial light. And then, of course, there's natural light and the rhythms that go with that. How does our light exposure influence our circadian rhythm and therefore our cognitive function?
So light is so critical for us. It's one of the things that we really should pay more attention to. So as you've mentioned, we're living in this sort of world where we should be nicely entrained to the 24-hour light-dark cycle. We're very, very sensitive to outdoor light. We're very sensitive to outdoor light in the morning specifically, actually. Its primary job then is to shut off melatonin production so that we can move into this state of alertness. That's all very good and well. But as you've quite rightly mentioned, what's happening now is that we're extending our day artificially with a lot of internal lighting. And so on one hand, that's tricking our body into thinking that bedtime can be later than what it needs to be. And I just think of go camping, see what happens. When you don't have artificial light, you'll find your bedtime moves forward. And so, sure, what's the problem with that? The thing is that you're then reducing your sleep opportunity. And so you'll be slightly restricting your sleep opportunity, which means that you'll become chronically sleep deprived if you are not getting sufficient sleep by extending your bedtime. It's the artificial light that we think about in our sort of room lighting as one thing. You know, many of us are getting quite smart around that and beginning to sort of manage our home lighting a little bit more cleverly so that we're not in very, very bright environments towards the end of the day. But it's actually now more concerning is the light that comes off our devices. Handheld devices, obviously, in close proximity to our eyes, they're emitting pretty bright light. And so it's a short wavelength bright light, which is very powerful at delaying our production of melatonin. And so again, that's interfering with our natural sleep-wake pattern by shifting us to a later sort of sleep timing. And so from a cognitive perspective, again, it's just, it's not so much that the light is going to interfere with cognition. I mean, light can be very alerting. That's super helpful. But it's more the effect that it's having on our sleep opportunity, putting us into this constant state of partial sleep deprivation, which is going to then, of course, have an impact on our memory, on our ability to do higher order functioning, etc.
So on this, what would be your recommendations in terms of looking at optimal sleep around both natural light and artificial light? If you could wave a magic wand, what would you make people do?
Two things. We need to work with the light that we're given. So we speak about our natural light. Ideally, we sleep in sync with the light-dark cycle. In South Africa, we're relatively fortunate that we have a pretty consistent photo period. This refers to the amount of natural daylight that we have from summer to winter. Yes, we are sort of bemoaning winter months right now when you were getting up when it's still dark. But what it means is you can shift your sleep patterns a little bit to match the seasons at the end of the day. So if you're lucky enough to be able to sleep in a little bit in winter and sort of go to bed a little bit later, well, that's great. That's definitely quite useful. The other thing to consider is what about light at the end of the day? And so it's super convenient and really lovely to have heaps of light at the end of the day, but it does, as I've mentioned, start to curtail our sleep opportunity because it suppresses and delays our melatonin production. And we're thinking specifically about our devices. So people think, yeah, but my lights are out in my room. I'm just in my bed and I've just got my phone with me. You should really understand that the light coming from that phone, even with some of the filters that are on there, is still actually bright enough to interfere with melatonin. So what are we going to do about this? On one hand, if you're an absolute phone addict, I mean, that's a different story for another time probably. You definitely want to make sure you've got the filter on your phone, which is reducing the amount of blue light that is emitted from your screen. So you should use sort of night mode or night shift, depending on the kind of device that you have. Set it to be in sync with sunrise and sunset, because ideally that's the kind of sort of light changes that we're seeking to try to follow. And that'll definitely have quite a big impact. And then the other thing, which is obviously not quite so popular, is like, could you consider detoxing from your phone at the end of each day and putting it aside, especially for that last hour or so before bedtime? Doing other things, reading with old school light, chatting to people. Actually, I can't believe I'm going to actually say this, but even it's better to be watching TV, because that screen is miles away from you generally, and you're not in a bedroom as well, which is hopefully a really good idea as well. And that's a great way to unwind and to relax, and you're getting rid of that excessive light exposure, which definitely interferes with melatonin.
So difficult, yet so important. And we now all have dementia in our minds. So hopefully that will make it a little bit easier. You've mentioned a couple times your own individual sleep need. And I'm interested to hear from you how we know what our individual sleep need is.
So this is tricky, because you're not allowed to lie to yourself, because nobody wants to admit that they've got an individual sleep need that is pretty long, because that's inconvenient. We've chatted about this before. There are 24 hours in the day. Who wants to have to spend more time sleeping than what they actually need to? But it's actually a really good exercise to try to figure it out. So some people know intuitively, I think I need about X or Y. But to try and take some of the guesswork out of it, and maybe also the lying to yourself, because it's an inconvenient truth, what I ask people to do is, when you next have a holiday, and when I say holiday, I'm looking at least 6 or 7 days. I don't know if many people get that much holiday straight, but if you do, what you'll find is in the first couple of days, you'll do payback sleep. So you'll probably extend your sleep. You might have been super stressed at work before holiday. There's lots of reasons. You might have just been burning the candle at sort of both ends. You'll pay back sleep in the first couple of nights. And then what you should notice is that after 5, 6, 7 nights or so, your sleep will actually probably start to shorten. And then you need to look and see, what is the timing of my sleep? When is my body asking me to go to bed and to wake up? And what is that duration? And that is probably your own personal, what I call your sleep sweet spot.
That's great. I think we all now need a week-long holiday to go and figure this out. Dale, I'm going to end off with something that I think a lot of people would have heard about. And you've given us so many wonderful practical tips and tools throughout this whole episode. But something we haven't chatted about is napping and power naps and non-sleep deep rest. Can you just talk us through what happens when we nap and how this then relates back to our cognitive performance and function?
Sure. So napping's quite contentious, that we get people that are, and I'm speaking about sleep scientists here as well, pro-napping, very much dead against it. So you must understand that when you've got scientists coming at it from two different angles like that, we're not clear at all. And so I think we need to think about, why are you napping? What kind of napping are you doing? And then what are you aiming to get out of this? So if I just very briefly think about, if you're a person who thinks, I cannot get through the average day without napping, for me, that's a massive red flag that something is untoward, because you should be able to have one consolidated nocturnal sleep at nighttime. You should not need to sleep during the daytime. We are not polyphasic sleepers. So it's a red flag for sure that your nighttime sleep is either too short or it's too disturbed and you're not functioning as you should do. Most people will say that, well, there's some evidence now to show that napping seems to be really good for memory. And there's a couple of recent studies that have come out to show this, where they've sort of given people a task and then learn new information, have a nap, and then let's see how easily you can retrieve that information compared to if you haven't napped. And lo and behold, unfortunately for my case, we find that people are able to perform better on these memory tasks when they've had that little nap compared to when they haven't. So we know that no matter when you sleep, whatever time of day, you're actually helping to consolidate memories. So there's good parts to napping. But the problem is that if you're heavily reliant on naps and you're making them very late in the day, they can interfere with your nighttime sleep. And now you're going to perpetuate the cycle of later bedtime than what you should have, chronically sleep deprived, need to nap again the next day. So I'm not a massive fan of naps, as you can tell.
You're an anti-napper.
I'm an anti-napper, yeah. I always speak about nap licenses and who gets them. And so definitely, if you haven't earned your nap license, you shouldn't be napping. If you're a mom or a dad of a newborn, you absolutely get a nap license because you have no control over how much sleep you're going to be getting. Adolescents get nap licenses because they're in a hugely sort of stressful social, emotional, and physical growth sort of area, and they absolutely need extra sleep. Because what happens with adolescents, out of interest, is that their clock has shifted. They've still got to get to school on time. Their sleep opportunity gets crunched. It's not their fault that they can't go to bed on time. If you force them to try and sleep early, they're going to just present with insomnia-like symptoms. So we give them a nap license so that they can pay back some of that sleep debt. And sometimes it's on a daily basis, by the way. When we're sick, we get a nap license as well, because our body needs to be able to do a lot of its repair and recovery when we sleep. Our immune system is super active, as we've mentioned before. So when you're not well, nap away. When we're paying back acute sleep debt, okay, as a once-off every now and then, absolutely get a nap license. And then athletes, they get a nap license because their sleep need is so much bigger than the rest of us owing to their big training demand. And it's usually quite unfeasible for them to get sufficient sleep just at nighttime. So they very often need to supplement with naps. And then the last category are shift workers. Because of their unusual work schedules, it's very difficult for them to often get sufficient sleep in one block, especially when they're doing night shift. And so then they'll often be allowed a bit of a nap sort of right before a night shift starts so that they can get through that shift without having too many bad consequences.
That's really helpful. So we need to be quite judicious about our naps.
Absolutely. But let me speak about power napping, because this is actually really interesting. So power naps are sort of anything between 5 and 15 minutes. So it's pretty short sleep. And you'll often hear, I think about people in the business world, they're like, I just need a quick power nap and then I'm good to go again. So you have to ask yourself, what has gone wrong in this day that this person who's high functioning says, just give me a minute, I'm just putting my head down. They quickly sleep for a few minutes and then they're up and they're going again. You shouldn't need to be doing that, right? But they say that it'll give them just that extra bit of boost that they need to be able to think clearly again. And so what's happened is that person's sleep deprived. They're chronically sleep deprived, in fact. And so when we have quite a lot of sleep deprivation, we've got a lot of what we call sleep pressure. So sleep pressure relates to this accumulation of adenosine, which builds up during the daytime. And the more adenosine that we have, the more sluggish we start to feel. And you know that heavy feeling where you just can't keep your eyes open? That's that big sort of sleep pressure buildup. And so what a power nap does is it's a quick release on that sleep pressure valve so that you quickly remove a little bit of that adenosine in that sleep period, and you wake up, that sleep pressure is reduced, and you feel that you're good to go again. And so from that perspective, power napping can be really useful. And so my advice, though, is to use it judiciously. So you need to use it for a very specific reason or very sort of short-term strategy to try to manage your cognitive performance and ability. If you find that you need to do it on a regular basis, I would say, listen, can we rather talk about your nighttime sleep and see what's going on over there?
So we've spoken a bit about power naps, but for people that take more prolonged afternoon naps, often people wake up and say they feel quite groggy, a little bit out of it. What are the physiological mechanisms that are underpinning those feelings?
So the short of it is that they've just slept for too long. So we know that we go through different cycles in our sleep. So we will go from lighter phases into some deeper phases of sleep. And really probably what's happened here is that through having a longer sleep, they've gone into their slow wave or their deep sleep. And if you wake up out of slow wave or deep sleep, it literally feels like you're in treacle. Your brain is foggy, your tongue is thick, you feel incoherent. And so it's literally just a matter of having got into too deep a sleep and then without having a natural lightening of that with that afternoon sleep. And in part, it's also probably what's happened is you've essentially, remember we spoke about you let your guard down when you sleep. And so we've got to have this change in guard, if you like, with our autonomic nervous system. So in the daytime, our sympathetic nervous system is super active and our parasympathetic nervous system is less so that we can be alert and busy. And then when we sleep, there's got to be a switch so that we become more parasympathetic dominant. And so probably when you've gone into this deep sleep as well, you've had complete sympathetic nervous system withdrawal, you're in that parasympathetic nervous system state of being in rest and digest. And now you're asking your body quite cruelly to please switch you back again. And you need that alerting sort of spike, a little bit more adrenaline to sort of kick in to get that parasympathetic nervous system dominant again so that you can feel less cloudy.
Right, that makes complete sense. I think we've all been there and experienced that. And that also then, does that then explain why after a longer afternoon nap, you've then got rid of some of your adenosine and then it's harder to fall asleep later?
Absolutely. So it basically buys you time for extra wakefulness, which means that you don't get those sleep signals quite as early as you would normally do.
And again, then that's influencing the consistency of our sleep, which again, if it's something that you're doing often is not ideal.
Exactly.
That's really helpful. So if anyone's listening and requiring frequent naps or power naps, then maybe it's time to have a look at your overall sleep and what that looks like, right?
Great, yeah.
Dale, thank you so much for joining us for this episode and sharing all your expertise and insights on this. It's been absolutely fascinating.
Thanks for having me.
For our listeners, by understanding the way that our sleep relates to our cognitive performance, we can make the necessary changes to our day-to-day activities to optimize our cognitive functioning. For more information and resources, please look in the description below and stay tuned for more Smulcast episodes. Until next time, keep living healthier, fuller lives.